Hello and welcome to today's discussion, Advance Australia Prepare, How to Make Australian Businesses Future Ready. My name is Elizabeth Mackey and I'm a Senior Manager at Economist Impact. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I come to you from today, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I'd also like to say a big thank you to Cognizant for generously supporting this interactive virtual panel discussion, and that's set to be an interesting and topical one. Now, just a few housekeeping items before we begin. If you do experience any issues with the webinar, our suggestion is to use Google Chrome if you have a choice of browser. And if you are interested in reading anything further on this topic, you'll see a box with a selection of extra materials available for download. Now, we will be answering questions today, but however, due to time constraints, we may unfortunately not have time to answer them all. Now on to the interesting stuff. I am absolutely delighted to be joined by my three esteemed panellists. We have Jane Livesey, Chief Executive for Australia and New Zealand at Cognizant. In this role, Jane is focused on providing Australian and New Zealand enterprises and governments with high-quality, market-leading digital transformation capabilities. She joined Cognizant in August 2020 from PwC, where she led the technology consulting practice in Australia and served as Chief Executive of the Strategy, Consulting and Global Technology Leadership teams. We're also joined by Michael Roseman, a professor at Queensland University of Technology. Michael is globally known for his work in the areas of process management, innovation and trust. He has published 9 books available in 5 languages and more than 350 refereed papers. He is also the Honorary Consul for Germany in Southern Queensland. And finally, Rebecca Jinks, Director of ESG and Sustainability at Taronga Ventures. Her career has ranged from in-house ESG-focused business strategy development and program deployment to consultancy and advisory services. Ms. Jinks has a demonstrated track record of creating meaningful real-world solutions to achieve the vision of real asset investors, owners, and occupiers. Now, if you are seeking further information around the panellists, you'll find their full biographies on the screen under this media player. Now, before I get into the discussion with the panellists, as well as taking a number of questions from the audience, I just want to remind you of why we are all here discussing this today. A recent briefing paper discussing the future readiness of multinational businesses and their operating environments revealed that Australia ranks 7th out of 10 of the world's biggest economies, scoring strongest in business preparedness. Although all the economies surveyed have healthy fundamentals, digging deeper into Australia's results unearths concerns. Today, the experts will discuss the key findings of the research into Australia's future readiness compared to other markets. Now, to kick off the discussion, the first question is for all panellists, but Jane, if I might come to you first. Australia is ranked 6th, so in the middle of the pack for business preparedness to become future ready. From your unique perspective, what do you think this says about Australian businesses?
Thanks, Liz. We emerged from the pandemic really heavy on technology. We've adopted technology broadly and widely through this period of time. But where we're falling short and where the research is pointing us to is that we're not able to unlock the value from these investments from a business standpoint in comparison to some of our global counterparts. We're also seeing challenges in terms of pivoting our working capital and really driving the productivity gains that we're looking for as businesses across the Australian market. We're also seeing that we're falling behind in terms of achieving ESG targets, and this is something that's becoming increasingly important to businesses. Where we really see this, in totality, we're falling behind in terms of our digital business models, and in comparison to our counterparts around the world, they're accelerating a lot faster, and this can have repercussions for the ANZ economy overall.
Thank you. I mean, I think this is an area in the report that we saw a real tight clustering of results. So whilst it does sort of seem as if Australia's in the middle of the pack, the scores really do reflect that there are strong businesses and there is a strong operating environment. Michael, can I throw this one to you next?
Of course, Elizabeth. And I think we have to discuss if it's an absolute or a relative measure, I guess, collectively around the world. a lot of organizations could do more to get ready for the future. If you look at this as a half full problem, I guess we can say it's exciting. Australian organizations have a great opportunity to explore a future opportunity-rich environment. It shows us also, however, that I guess the capability to get ready for the future is probably underdeveloped. We don't have a widespread professionalization of innovation. Innovation accounting is probably underdeveloped. ESG literacy, as Jane highlighted, underdeveloped. So I think it points also as a diagnosis to our collective capability. And I guess we can speak around the world to get ready for the future. And I think that's a massive educational challenge, but it's opportunity for all of us.
Thank you. I mean, the report did show that Australia showed quite strong performance in quality assurance of supplier and vendor selection. And I think this really demonstrates robust supply chains, but also a real strength in navigating the challenge that are unique to Australia and being quite isolated in where we are. Rebecca, can I ask you your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, look, I really love that this paper takes into consideration ESG and technology adoption. And as Jane said, the concept of actually unlocking value from technology, not just deploying and leaving it. I think both of these concepts are super interconnected and so dependent on one another. One will accelerate the other and vice versa. But we can see from the paper that Australia is below average for sustainability policy and for unlocking that value in innovation and technology. And this is probably why we've performed poorly overall, or at least run middle of the pack. As the other panelists indicated, there are a couple of reasons that we've sort of fallen short in both of those areas. But basically, I think that the ranking is purely a symptom of delayed understanding of how to get that value out of the technology, and also a delayed reaction in addressing ESG and climate change needs in terms of the way that the rest of the world has reacted to some of these requirements. How long did we have the government that was sceptical of climate change for? We don't really have any proper policies in the ESG space, and innovation really hasn't been fostered locally in the way that it has in other economies. And so I think that's probably why we've landed in a position where, you know, we're running middle of the pack. But it also starts to call out some of those really exciting opportunities for businesses to become more future ready and to potentially leapfrog some of those other economies and global competitors.
Thanks, Rebecca. You've raised some really interesting points there around ESG and sort of a lag in policy, which we'll come back to. But I think we'll just take this opportunity to just dig into the reasons behind why Australia wasn't ranked higher and what you think that we could be doing to be further along in this process. Do you want to kick off on that one?
Yeah, cool. Look, as you know, my interest is really that intersection of ESG and technology innovation, which is why I was so excited about this paper. And I'm really focused on how those two pieces of the pie come together and bolster each other. So, you know, when I read the report and contributed to it, I guess when I considered the external environment pillar that's outlined here, we can see that although Australia performed well for stability and business climate, it performed below average for ESG approaches and really unlocking that value in technology and innovation. So these two rapidly evolving areas that as a country we can really look to improve are really why I guess I have a job, which is a really exciting evolving space to be in. They're two super complex problems that can be leveraged to, as we said, sort of build up the other. But they also offer broader business function. They deliver efficiency and effectiveness and generally can help us to operate more effectively. So do we need to reduce costs? How can we think about ESG and technology and digitalization? Do we need to attract new talent? How can we leverage ESG and technology and digital adoption and new ways of working? And that will naturally contribute to the ongoing success and resilience and longevity of the businesses that we see in the Australian economy. So basically the external environment pillar that's referenced in this paper is the enablement of future readiness. So again, technology and digitalisation, those non-financial factors that really drive innovation and cost reduction. And they're really integral to ensuring that we do have a future ready economy. Again, as I said, it's the reason that we've sort of run middle of the pack. We can see a lot of other evolved economies that have those policies coming out, but also organisations that aren't just thinking about complying with the law. They're going above and beyond in the social space. They're really deploying technology to make sure they have the controls to reduce their carbon footprint, to reduce their waste footprint, and to make sure that they have that resilience to climate change, whether that's the direct threat to a physical asset or whether that's some of those transitional threats that are likely to come through, whether it's being affected by the EU taxonomy or any local regulation that's going to come through eventually. So basically what I'm trying to say is that if we want to be more future ready as an economy and for our businesses, we can really look to and lean on the concepts and the principles that underpin ESG and sustainability and sustainable ways of working to, keep our people safe, to keep our businesses resilient, and we can really use technology as a lever to pull for that.
Yeah, thank you. Some really interesting remarks there. And I mean, I think you're quite right in pointing out that with a lack of government policy, we've really seen sort of the private sector and industry just getting on with it. Jane, can I ask you your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and look, just to build on what Rebecca was saying is that we're absolutely seeing, this is a self-assessment by businesses in our market. And what we're clearly seeing in the responses is, 90% of respondents feel that businesses have a responsibility to society. Similar numbers of respondents, 90% feel that we have a responsibility for sustainability. And so nobody is waiting in terms of that expectation around what is our responsibility and what do we need to do here. What we're, however, seeing as we go further into the data, only 30% of respondents are actually monitoring the relevant data around waste production, around pollution, around the gender pay gap, all important pieces of information that helps us inform our actions. Less than 38% actually have plans in place. And so, exactly what Rebecca's saying here is that we've got an incredible opportunity. We've got a great intention, but where we're falling short at the moment is translating that intention into a plan and into actions that enables us to look at the information that we have available to us and using technology and data to do that. And then using that to inform what we're going to do in terms of the plans and actions we take.
Thank you. I mean, there's, yes, again, some really interesting points there, and it sort of sounds as if there needs to be a bit more of a holistic approach being taken on an overall level. Michael, can I get your thoughts on this one too, please?
Sure, Elizabeth. So change is required when you want to become future ready, and leaders and organizations change for one of two reasons. They have to or they want to. There's a sense of urgency or a sense of ambition. And urgency either comes from people, customers voting with their feet or money, or policies. You see European countries that aggressively evacuate certain types of energy sources, giving birth to renewable energies, for example. You see countries where individual customers vote with their feet and create a sense of urgency. I guess COVID has seen a sense of urgency, but it was often short-termism. We needed to create a short-term solution. And for a lot of organizations, the new normal looks very much like the old normal. Now, sense of ambition is when leaders said, this is maybe not just cost efficiency gains, these are new experiences, new sources of revenue. And I think both sides probably were a bit underdeveloped in Australia. And when you look at the Australian economy, we are weathering quite well. And without a sense of urgency and a sense of ambition, you're very happy to live your daily practices. And what I would encourage, if it's either not coming from customers or policy, it's up to our leaders to carefully consider what is our sense of ambition. And if technology less and less becomes a bottleneck, I very much assume it's the ambition and not technological constraints that will hold us back.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, one of the areas, and Michael, I might stay with you for this sort of point in question. One one of the areas the report references is issues with accessing talent here in Australia and putting poor workforce productivity and ill-matched skills, as well as the inaccessibility to higher education at the heart of it. We also know, though, that these labour shortages are being felt on a global scale. And so I think there's a really interesting question here around what Australia could be doing to build and attract the relevant workforce, particularly to harness the power of technology and off the back of the pandemic, as you've just noted. And I guess in the context of also looking to transition to less carbon intensive industries and putting ESG objectives as a priority.
It's a very good question. We need to extend that question, however, I feel. It's not just about attracting talent, it's about nurturing talent. And the global pool for talent is, as we all know, severely constrained. What we need to do is find a way that those individuals, the workforce that we have, understands technology potential, becomes climate literate, has ESG skills as required. And in the future, organizations probably have to go beyond ensuring financial and physical well-being, but also will play a role when it comes to educational well-being. I personally very much believe that learning fast is also a new source of competitive advantage. And the need for organizations to not just rely on the next generation of talent, but to ensure that in some cases, the thousands or tens of thousands of individuals we have truly understand requirements and possibilities is an entire new obligation. And that requires that roles like a chief learning officer, the capability to sense what we need to know and to upskill quickly will grow, because we will not be able to rely purely on sourcing domestic or global talent.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key outcomes of the paper was around the fact that business need to be investing in employee reskilling as well as upskilling, and that's both to sort of mitigate the crunch and to also retain workers as on a global scale that it's becoming more and more competitive. Jane, can I ask for your views on this question?
It's really fascinating in terms of transformation of organisations and the type of talent that is needed to unlock value, to either unlock value from technology, to deliver new products and services. That needs the technical expertise, the digital, the experience design. It needs really deep business knowledge, and it needs to come together. And one of the things we're seeing, particularly, is there is a gap between the sort of IT and the business, and our business models aren't necessarily enabling us to bring that together. Very much like Michael says, organizations need to think about talent and how they skill and reskill their organization to really embrace technology and digital solutions and to work differently in terms of the way that they bring those together. There's also a huge opportunity to look outside our own doors and to where can we unlock talent and create learning opportunities. And in a very similar way that organizations are very focused on their role in society, it is thinking about how do we reach into Australia more broadly and unlock talent pools that maybe haven't had the opportunity to be trained in technology. At Cognizant, we're working a lot with universities, but also with schools, helping bring through traineeships and development around technology and digital skills, retraining. We have refugees that are coming into the country that bring great skills and talent, but maybe haven't had the opportunity. Mothers returning to the workforce. We have plumbers who have decided that they would like to actually retrain and take on another skill around technology. And so these are all opportunities for organizations to get involved. But we are behind in Australia in terms of our digital talent. We've been incredibly reliant on global talent pools to support us in our digital and technology needs. So there's not a quick fix here, but something that we all need to get our focus on because it's going to take a collective effort to really start to lift those talent and that learning, as Michael highlights, across Australia to ensure that we have the skills that we need to take us forward in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one of the highlights of the report is that there's a real sort of mismatch between employees that are in the market and the skills that they have, and how we can look at reskilling them to ensure that they're sort of working most effectively and efficiently in a role that suits them, which I think is a really interesting concept and something that I think you're quite right needs to be looked at as a collective. Rebecca, can I seek your views on this one?
Yeah, I think you know, Jane and Michael are totally right. We know that we don't necessarily have the digital talent in our local market that we need, but I think, you know, on the flip side of the coin, organizations also need to think about how do they leverage technology to access the talent that we have in the market that we have. Atlassian, you know, recently said that they were going on a national tour with their bus and they're calling it #work-from-anywhere or something like that. And they're going to all these regional cities, they're going to the capital cities, they're going to find people that have an interest in the roles that they have advertised. They're going to give them the computer, they're going to enable them technologically, and they can work from wherever they want to work from. And then all of a sudden, they have just opened up access to these people that have to work in a regional community because they have a sick parent, or they have whatever the requirement is for them to work outside of a capital city. All of a sudden, you've opened up that talent pool, right? So how do we use technology to access the people that we have in country? But also, you know, to start to train them as well, and to understand that there is that sort of remote working requirement. I think the other really interesting thing that I see, and I'm often working with clients on, is how do we understand the value proposition of an organization to attract some of that talent? There's a shortage, there's a fight for talent, and now it's a buyer's market. And so if I'm looking for a job, I am values-based, and I want to find an organization that is going to have similar value propositions, is going to contribute something positive to the community that I believe in, something that gets me up in the morning, something that energizes me through the day and keeps me working through those hard moments. And so we now have the opportunity as employees to make that decision. And so organizations are looking to their sustainability and their ESG strategies and their ESG propositions and programs to start to talk to the market and their employees about, if you work for me, you will give this back to the community and you will feel good and you are doing something positive. So how do we look at ESG as not just sort of a compliance thing that might give us a better debt profile, that might open up more equity for us, that we kind of have to do because there's some sort of regulation and people are talking about it, and actually actively using some of these environmental and social principles to attract that talent and not just do good and be good, but to make our people feel good and to keep our people longer and open ourselves up to talent that may not have already been there.
Yeah, some really interesting points there. And I think what is, what's most interesting about sort of one of the figures that came out of the report was that 85% of businesses said that they were still experiencing talent shortages, and that was resulting in them not being able to operate at full capacity. And so thinking innovatively about how you can bring people on board and what you're actually offering, and as you say, it's sort of an employee's market at the moment, thinking innovatively about how you can attract people. I think, it sounds like a really interesting way forward. Rebecca, I might stay with you for this next point in question. The report highlights government policy lagging behind business activity on ESG, but there's undoubtedly been a shift in approach towards climate change and the clean growth agenda since the federal election, earlier this year. Now we're seeing that the 43% reduction in carbon emissions is legislated through the climate change bill. We're seeing consultations on Australia's carbon credit scheme. We've heard the climate change and energy minister speak about mandatory climate related disclosures. Do you think, or can policy catch up? And what sort of things can businesses be doing to continue accelerating their ESG activities? And particularly from your perspective of sort of working with businesses here in Australia.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question that we need to keep thinking about. Australia ranked second for creating a strong business environment, and a big part of that was because of the regulatory and strong legal context that we operate within. This demonstrates in itself the important role that government can play in furthering and bolstering protections for issues and risks, And ESG is just a part of that, and sustainability and climate change is a part of that. So with the right leadership and ambition, policy will be able to catch up. We've seen it happen in other markets globally. And this government, as you said, we've just had an election. They've got a stronger conviction than the previous, and there are signs of ambition. So I'm hopeful that the regulation will come, although, you know, it always moves a bit slowly. If we think about what's happening today, we see the Australian Sustainable Finance Initiative working on a taxonomy. The group are presenting in government. They're working with other disclosure bodies locally and globally to ensure alignment with the International Sustainability Standards Board, the EU taxonomy as well. As a country, we're learning from those other jurisdictions that have already started on this journey, and we're looking to bring that best practice home. Particularly at the moment, the focus here is really around transparency and disclosure in the ESG space. We have global frameworks available to us already. We've got the SDI that links finance products to the SDGs. If you've got an investor at any level that sits in the EU, then you're probably going to have to comply with the EU taxonomy at some point, or be able to at least talk to it as well. And so with this focus filtering into Australian businesses, which I see every day, each industry will be touched by a requirement to be able to understand, mitigate, and to communicate their approach to ESG, and think about that not just in terms of the positive contribution of their product and their services, but also the negative impacts of their operations. I'm also pretty conscious that most of these actions focus on the environmental pillar, and quite heavily actually on carbon mitigation and climate management. It's definitely the hot topic at the moment in ESG, but I'd like to stress that we can't lose sight of the social side of the coin, and making moves to continue to understand and control impacts and opportunity here is super important, and will become an increasing focus as well. I suspect that in Australia, we're going to be less inclined to legislate the social disclosure piece, at least in the near term. And there will be a focus to understand that environmental and climate change pillar. But this doesn't make it any less important for organisations to try and address either. We've also seen the ASX recommend that listed companies disclose their ESG risks and disclosures and their programs in line with the TCFD framework, and potentially we'll see some comments from them on the nature-based framework as well. But this isn't a regulated requirement yet. It's just a recommendation from the ASX. I would anticipate, as I said, that we'll probably end up with a framework similar to what we've got in Singapore with their Monetary Authority of Singapore ESG disclosure requirement. So something that leans on TCFD and TNFD. We've seen ASICs come out in June with the info sheet 271, I think it was, and this detailed how businesses can adhere to ESG related regulations and mitigate greenwashing. And actually greenwashing is going to be a big focus over the next period of time for the watchdog and for some of those bodies as well, to make sure that we're not misleading consumers and we're being as honest as possible, and we're not sort of, you know, trying to greenwash in a negative way. So all of that is to say that I think that government is thinking about this space, and I do hope that regulation comes, but we know that regulation is always behind industry. It's just the way that it is. So I continue to urge organisations and financial groups to continue to push the envelope and to proactively manage the ESG risks and disclosures and opportunities, and don't wait for it to be a legislative requirement. It will come. It's happening in other economies. We can get guidelines from them. Don't wait. It will come. It will just be a bit slower than people like me would like.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is exactly one of those areas, particularly around sort of the disclosure piece, that we're seeing industry, private sector move a little bit faster than government and the regulators, albeit the ASFI's work is being done with the support of the regulators and government. And interestingly, they are including those social indicators as part of their taxonomy, which is great to see. So we're starting to see a rise in that accountability on that side of things too. Michael, can I seek your views on this question?
Absolutely, and I like to reiterate what Rebecca said. This is not about compliance, that's a competitive opportunity, competing for talent and competing for customers. And I guess those organizations that are purely reactive and reacting to the next regulation will definitely have a disadvantage. And we see this with our very own students who truly want to change the world and not just have a self-fulfilling career now. So if you want to compete for talent and or customers, ESG has to become a priority, and ESG will require different types of governance. Governance that we are probably not used to, and decision-making processes that are not one-dimensional anymore. There won't be any longer just quarterly monetary targets that need to be satisfied, and making decisions that are multidimensional, that combine quantitative and qualitative, monetary and monetary, not non-monetary decisions, is something that is probably requiring an entirely new set of capabilities. Nevertheless, I believe policies can make a change. You look at Norway and the way this country incentivized the uptake of e-vehicles. You look at other European countries and the way they constrain, let's say, packaging in retail outlets, where literally as a customer, you can leave every single piece of packaging at the retail store, and where non-recycling is just unthinkable. So that puts a lot of constraints and accelerates the design of recycling logistics, which we probably don't have in place right now here in Australia. So I think it would be an interplay, again, of talent voting with their available work for those organizations that have the right attitude, customers voting with their money, and I think policymakers who have a chance, if there's a sense of ambition, to either incentivize or constrain decision-making.
Yeah, thank you. Some really interesting points there. Jane, in the report, you've called for greater innovation of frameworks to support the ESG agenda in Australia. What are your thoughts on where the policy can catch up and the sort of things that businesses can be doing?
Yeah, look, I think it comes back to something that Michael said earlier around the sense of urgency. And so if we sit and wait for regulation and policy, there's a really big opportunity that we're going to miss. And we're seeing some great examples in Australia with responsible lending, around sustainability, some really, big shifts that are happening from a social standpoint in relation to inclusion and diversity, which really starts to pivot us to move forward. We've had a history of where we don't feel the sense of urgency. We typically wait. Other priorities take hold, and particularly when we have things like a pandemic, which can be really, a key event of shifting priorities, we lose that momentum very quickly. So when we look at what is happening at the moment, what can we do? How do we start to think about bringing that sense of urgency, but also, I think Michael also highlighted, a slightly longer term view in terms of where we're going into business. So how do we differentiate ourselves as organizations in terms of the products and services that we're offering our consumers, and in terms of those being delivered in a way that have maximum impact in terms of the benefit to the consumer, but minimum impact in terms of the impact on society and the impact, particularly from a sustainability standpoint, but also a social standpoint. So how do we bring this urgency into our responsibility? How do we then think about getting that speed to value in terms of how do we approach the market and start to deliver on some of these promises? One of the big things in terms of innovation at the moment is actually quite simple. We have a huge amount of data. As organizations, if we're a mining company, we have, huge amounts of equipment, operations that are happening and collecting data, every moment of the day across this. That is giving us a lot of insight into what is the impact we're having. What are the emissions that we are creating? What is the waste that we are generating? Businesses have very much relied from an innovation standpoint on algorithms and predictions around their impact. But the reality is we have a lot of data that we can garner insight from that will help businesses really have both the confidence once the regulations come around their reporting, but also what are the actions that we can take. And when you start to look at that data and insight, it starts to generate that sense of urgency because you can really see what is happening within the operations. There's definitely cost savings benefits from operating more efficiently and effectively. There are benefits in terms of that impact on society. There is huge benefits in terms of talent and the way that we're coming through. But a lot of the innovation really comes from understanding the data and taking the action. We are seeing organizations in Australia, there's sort of 80% adoption of cloud and data. We're seeing really good adoption of AI and machine learning. So, we are in Australia embracing all of the tools that can help us with this innovation, but it's really about how we apply it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to stay on that point that you've just made there, Jane. And it's sort of around, I guess the next question I have is around how technology can be used to activate business ESG programs and vice versa. What benefits can ESG offer to the technology community?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, when we start to kind of come down those layers, and so in any type of transformation, whether it's related to ESG, if it's related to looking at core business operations, we're really thinking about what is the impact that we're trying to make, what's the outcome we're trying to achieve, and how do we best do it. And technology applied in its own right, without looking at the value that you're trying to create, really becomes technology for technology's sake, rather than putting forward lasting and impactful change. And this is really the key or the secret sauce to how do we get this working? How do we use what we've got in our kit bag? Because we have invested heavily as Australian businesses to really adopt technology, but how do we take that and think about that meaningful impact that we can have and the insight that we can derive and how the tools can help us in terms of the actions that we need to take. And there's some really, we see great examples. At the moment, one of the biggest ones is just around, what is the impact and the effectiveness of our supply chain? Supply chain is a huge topic at the moment, but it's not just about, if I'm a supermarket, I'm not only looking at how I get fruit and veggies, from the farmer to the store, but how do I minimize wastage? How do I actually make sure that where we have excess supply, we are creating the right opportunity to utilize that supply? And, it's great to see our retailers working with charitable organizations, etc., to ensure that we're minimizing waste and that we're getting that supply to people who can use it, that excess supply. But that really allows, that whole exercise of really going from the paddock all the way through to how we're managing the waste is a massive data exercise, using the algorithms and the insights, actually planning the demand that we have and ensuring that the supply matches to it, and always managing through and taking the actions that are required to enable us to be operating more effectively and efficiently. And using that predictability, this is using AI, it's using the machine learning, it's using that intelligence and technology to help us do that. And so we have to keep thinking about this. We have to think about that efficiency and effectiveness in our operations. A big topic of conversation at the moment is, of course, energy and the cost of energy. And, what we're seeing happen in the UK and Europe, and that cost of energy, even thinking about what is the cost of our data centers, or our cloud suppliers. Are we set up in a way that is minimizing the use of energy? How are we going to respond as a business in terms of energy costs going up, and how do we think about that effectiveness? Actually comes from data and insight and understanding what is our footprint, what are we using, how are we using it, and how can we change things so that we can use that energy more efficiently and more effectively. So just a couple of examples of really how using that knowledge and innovation can actually help us really shift the way that we're operating our businesses.
Thanks, Jane. I mean, I think we're seeing some really interesting things happen at the moment, and the cross-section between technology and ESG is really interesting. And we're seeing some stuff around blockchain and how we can track carbon emissions and reduce wastage. Rebecca, I might put this question to you now. Can I ask for your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think it's worth acknowledging as well, before we sort of jump into it, that not all companies do or can act and execute on ESG well. And so, as sort of Michael was saying earlier, all of a sudden these practices and adopting innovation to deliver an ESG program helps us to get a bit of a competitive advantage. And so, if we start to look at those technology solutions that are in the market today, we can streamline processes. As Jane said, what is the data collection process? How do we get insights from that data point? How do we use technology and AI to do that? But then how do we actually deliver solutions, real world on the ground solutions that are going to reduce that impact and deliver that value that we're looking for when we're collecting that data? And I do believe that Australian businesses can leapfrog the competitors by doing this. We're not going on the traditional step-by-step. We can learn from other economies and other global companies that have done this. So, starting to think about how do we get the data? There are some really cool, if we think about the office building, for example, there are some sensors that you can put in the building that will collect the temperature, the carbon monoxide, the carbon dioxide in the air, the lux levels, and they can all feed back to your building management system and automatically turn the lights off if no one's in there. They can turn the cooling up if it's getting too hot. If the air's not fresh enough, bring some fresh air in. We can do all this automatically today. We've got the sensors, we've got the building management systems, and we've got the means for those data points to talk to each other. And then how do we get insights from that data? Again, there's a lot of algorithms and a lot of really smart people that have built solutions out there that will help us to get those insights. We've got companies like Measurable, where you can put all of your ESG data into it, and they'll give you insights on, of your 700 properties that you own, these are the 5 that you should focus on because they're the most energy intensive and you're going to get the biggest bang for buck. And by the way, based on the CREM pathway, they're going to be stranded assets if you don't do anything in a couple of years. And then we start to think about, well, what's the impact, as Jane said, the impact that we want to achieve. So at the moment, everyone's trying to figure out in the building world, embodied carbon. How do we reduce the carbon that's associated with building a building? Low carbon concrete. Concrete, it contributes like 14% of that embodied carbon. So we have companies like Carbon Cure today that are out in the market selling concrete to building sites. We've got them in Australia now. They will inject carbon dioxide into the concrete, and so you're removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Your building's holding extra carbon dioxide like a forest. But because we put the carbon dioxide in there, it changes the chemical reaction and the calcification of that concrete. And actually, we need to put less concrete into that space of concrete. We use more sand, and we reduce the inherent carbon that's associated with the concrete that's poured into that building. So, what are we trying to achieve, as Jane said, and then matching the technology solution to that problem statement. There are so many cool businesses out there today that are doing things like this, that have real world application. They're a proof of concept. It's just about Australian businesses, I think, becoming comfortable with using them. One of the biggest things I see today is that idea of de-risking a new product or a new technology. There might be a couple of POCs out there, but really we're a bit nervous to be the first mover. I think Australian businesses need to find a way to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. The only way that we're going to make the changes that we need to make in the time that we have left is by taking a little bit of a risk on some of these new technologies and innovations and the new ways of working. All we have to do is look at the social space, right? It's really confusing for most people. What is social value? I can't track it on a meter. I can't measure it. I can't see the waste in the bin. So what is it? There's no proper quantified metric. It tends to be a bit qualitative. We've got companies like the Social Value Portal out there that are looking to put numbers on some of these qualitative points, so that as businesses we can say, okay, I've built a hospital. I've got so many private beds in that hospital, and I've delivered this value to the government and to the public healthcare system because I've taken pressure off the public healthcare system, and that's worth X dollars to the community and to the economy. So there are systems out there, there are technologies and solutions that are helping us come to terms with some of these pretty wicked problems that previously we've had challenges talking about and diving into. So, you know, just thinking a little bit differently about what am I trying to achieve and how am I going to do that, and how we're going to execute on those solutions. I spend almost every day trying to match a problem with a solution, and almost always those solutions tend to be innovation and technology in the ESG space. I guess the flip side of that, though, is, and I think you mentioned it in the question, not just the value that can be delivered, but what is the risk with technology? You know, Jane said that we've got data centers and we're going to have like this huge upsurge in data storage requirements. Data centers are hugely energy intensive. They're hugely water intensive and they generate waste. So how do we try and bring down the carbon intensity of our data and of our technologies to try and mitigate climate change? What are those energy efficiency solutions? What are those automation solutions? But also, again, you know, the supply chain. We don't want slave labor or child labor in the mining of the minerals that go into the racks that are storing the data in our data centers. We don't want to be promoting those communities. So having a responsible thought through the supply chain is also going to be really important as we uptake and increase the amount of technology that we have in our ecosystem and in the way that we do work. So I guess as organisations and as a community, look at some of these new innovations to deliver ESG value and to get you to your goals, but also interrogate them. Think about what's involved in their delivery and their maintenance, and if there's better ways or smarter ways to work with some of those suppliers and companies to reduce that impact as well. So consider the positive and the negative impacts of doing business.
Thanks, Rebecca. We are coming towards the end of the session, but I'll just finally wrap up with sort of this last question. And Michael, just staying on sort of the digital strategy and technology theme, Australia scored second for executing digital strategy in the report, and you've said that Australians have willingness to engage with digital solutions and that Australia could emerge as a potential site for prototyping emerging innovations. So sort of touching on de-risking, just as Rebecca was just speaking about. However, we then see Australia ranking in the middle of the pack for overall technology and innovative ability, and the last for well-targeted technology adoption. From your perspective, how do we explain this disconnect?
So first of all, I truly believe that the digital literacy on the streets of Australia is extremely high in comparison with other parts of the world. You see financial systems in Northern America. You see the way we interact with government or retail outlets in Europe. I think Australia is really, really up there. What I sense is we don't promote this potential. There's great potential, but maybe not appropriate promotion. Retailers like Aldi conducted their very first credit card payment in Australia. Organizations like Amazon and Google conduct drone testing here. And large car manufacturers probably don't expect that they produce a car in Australia, but they would like to set up semi-realistic environments for driverless cars in Australia. And so I believe that Australia, which will always be a sort of 2% economy in terms of global revenue contribution for global organizations, has a huge opportunity to become the country of prototyping. We are in various climate zones. We are well structured, well governed, so the risk to prototype is low. And the more we need to innovate, the higher will be the demand for minimum viable products, services, quick experimentation and iteration. And isolated, well-governed areas like Australia are the perfect playground. In summary, and getting back to the conversation of the last hour, I hope that many of these experiments will not just look for monetary return on investment, but also environmental return on investment. And often we invest technology to reduce cost, and we do this explicitly, but implicitly we reduce carbon. And I wish that all the data that Jane talked about is measured not just to understand the cost reduction, but also the carbon reduction, because every time we reduce waste, it has not just economic, but also environmental implications. So if we in Australia are able not just to provide that playground, but also the scaffold, the environment that says, following the current trend and demand patterns, we measure far more than an economic, but also environmental success. of solutions that are relevant to the rest of the world, then I truly believe we create a first mover advantage. Australian citizens will be the first having access to incredibly interesting solutions. And I see no reason why Australia would not be one of the first homes to something like climate tech or hydro tech, where technology is used, for example, for tech-enabled certification of truly green hydrogen. And to be the home, maybe not of fintech or biotech, but of climate tech or hydrotech in the future is a tremendous opportunity. So maybe in addition to what Rebecca said, I think, yes, we need to be comfortable, but we definitely also need to become curious about the massive opportunity ahead of us.
Thanks, Michael. I'll just ask Jane to quickly give us Cognizant's view on this. Can you add some thoughts to Michael's comments?
Yeah, look, really to echo what Michael said, the sun comes up first in this part of the world, and we've, like the rest of the world, been through quite, a challenging time in terms of the pandemic. We're looking at many talent shortages, and we're navigating our way back into what is now a whole new world. We've got a real opportunity to lift our heads up, and times of economic pressure are actually times of great innovation, and we've seen that globally. We've had a really privileged position in this part of the world for a very long time around our economic prosperity. And so how do we take that, and how do we use this next period of time as an opportunity? Really to think about not only the impact that we make within our own businesses and our own four walls, but how do we create our sense of urgency around our responsibilities, and how do we look out to the broader world and think about the impact that the Australian market can start to have, and some of the innovations that we're creating there, ensuring that we're actually exporting those out and that we're thinking about that broader impact. This could be an incredible time of opportunity for us. And we're super excited. It's not a negative thing. Actually, this is a great self-assessment of where we are. And you can see the strength in terms of our intentions around the impact that we have in society, around the adoption of digital. As Michael said, we've got incredible digital literacy, and we love to adopt technologies. But it's really time for us to really accelerate and advance. And we need to be prepared for that. And we need to think about our plans and our strategies and how we take what we inherently know is something that is critically important to our businesses and to our society and to the globe. And what role do we want to play in that, and how do we take it forward? So, I think it's an incredibly exciting time for us here in Australia. And I think, the research is really highlighting for us that not only do we have an incredible opportunity, but we've got a bit of work to do to make sure that we harness that opportunity.
Thanks, Jane. And I certainly mirror your thoughts on that. There's lots of opportunity here, and sometimes we get stuck in sort of looking at it from a very negative perspective. But as Michael said earlier, this is potentially a glass half full opportunity. And I'll just quickly sort of summarize some of the key takeaways from this discussion. I thank you all very much for your insightful comments. And I think we've had a really broad range of expert views here today. I think it's quite clear that tech adoption in Australia is not an issue, but we are falling behind in terms of ESG and digital strategies. And it's quite important that we are starting to look at linking ESG and tech in a more mainstream way, and really unlocking the value of technology in achieving those ESG objectives. There's a real role here for businesses who do feel that they have responsibility to society and sustainability, but they really lack the plans that are in place. So they need to be sort of doing more to be on the front foot and attracting the right talent and pulling together and I guess implementing adequately their digital strategies. On the talent front, there needs to be more done to attract and nurture that talent. That's quite clear. I think everyone agrees on that. It's a global issue, but there are ways forward, and we can be sort of creative in the way that we address the issues. And I think, as Rebecca said, we need to look at sort of unlocking those talent pools and getting people skilled up in digital and ESG skills. And there's the ability to leverage the technology opportunities there to allow people to work remotely, to access skills in remote communities, to be able to sort of move forward in a new, innovative way, and one that really, I guess, highlights the uniqueness of Australia as it is. And I think this is a point that you touched on, Jane, around the organisation's value proposition. They need to be sort of highlighting that more and doing more to attract people with the right skills. I think it's quite clear from the report and from the comments today that businesses have been, and this is partly due to COVID, I would suggest that businesses are thinking about the shorter term outcomes and just getting through that next stage, whereas we're now at a point in time where longer term outcomes really need to be considered, and tech and the cross section between tech and ESG objectives are where the opportunities lie. So I think, just to sort of summarise there, I think we've had a really interesting discussion here, and I really appreciate you all taking the time to speak with us today. And just to sort of thank you all individually, we have Jane Livesey, Michael Roseman and Rebecca Jinks here today. I would also note for the audience that you can find the details to download the white paper, Advance Australia Prepare, How to Make Australian Businesses Future Ready, in the console below. And a big thank you again to Cognizant for supporting this webinar. I think it's been a really interesting and insightful discussion. Thank you all for your time. Goodbye.
Thank you.